Welcome back to Femme and Furious. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and today we are hanging out at the Silver Slipper. But before we get into all of the co-confused goodness that was this episode, let me tell you how you can support the podcast. You can follow anywhere that you get your podcast. You can subscribe anywhere that you get your podcast. Go watch on YouTube, go follow on Substack. You can go hang out with community over in the Patreon. Love to have you over there. You can also follow on TikTok and Instagram at Femme and Furious Pod. And as a little sidebar before we really dive in, I have a new show coming out. It is called Third Eye View. If you like the sometimes spiritual stuff that we dive into on this podcast, you will love Third Eye View. Third Eye View is going to be an intersection of pop culture and spirituality. But unlike Femme and Furious, where we show up every week for this show with a property in mind. Hello, hi, we're talking about this specific thing. Euphoria, season 3, episode 4. Third Eye View is not going to operate that way. You will have to do no homework. All you have to do is show up and listen. It will be out on Wednesday everywhere that you get your podcast. We are starting with the major arcana and tarot. And what each episode will dive into is how the tropes and archetypes that we love out in the world in storytelling, how they have been influenced by the esoteric knowledge that is out there in the cosmic galactic world that we are experiencing. So we're starting on Wednesday with The Fool. It is going to be an episode about the call to adventure. Each week we will do a different card with a different theme until we get our way through the major arcana. And then we will figure out where we're going from there. But that's my plan for that show for right now. When it comes to this episode today, I'm going to go a little all over the place because my notes are a little all over the place. And I'm struggling to figure out how to structure these episodes because I think that each episode of Euphoria is lacking like a clear structure in and of itself. There's a lot going on. I will say this episode of Euphoria, titled Kitty Likes to Dance, and directed, created, injected with all of the thoughts, feelings, opinions of Sam Levinson, right? This by far has been the strongest episode of the season. This was the most interesting. It was the most engaging. It was the most Euphoria-like. There's a lot of callbacks visually to seasons 1 or 2, which I thought helped to anchor this episode and to remind us, the audience, that when you strip the spectacle, you will be left with something that at its bare bones has a Euphoria-esque feeling to it. That's at least how I've felt. I've said it before on this podcast. I'm gonna fucking say it again. It just feels like Euphoria fanfiction. This even felt like Euphoria fanfiction, even within this episode. There was so many points that could have really leaned into that Euphoria-esque vibe. And I guess it's like hard to talk about the vibe or the concept of Euphoria without talking about Petra Collins and how that purple, blue, hazy, etheric vibe, all of the glitter vibe, that was all Petra Collins, who this concept deck together for the show, and then HBO ended up not hiring her because she was too young, which is to say that once again, women shape culture and men just monopolize off of that, or corporations just monopolize off of that. But fine, whatever. Let's just put that all aside. There was times in this club scene that Maddie and Cassie are at where if you just went a little bit harder on the color palette and added some labyrinth in there, you could have convinced me that this was another season of Euphoria. So it's got some echoes of the things that we like that are in there. When I take this season of Euphoria, season 3, it feels to me like the worst man you know at a bar. And you say, I like movies. And he's like, Quentin Tarantino, because there's only one person that comes to their mind. If we could have like a circle jerk for Jacob Elordi and Quentin Tarantino, that's what this season is doing. And so there's this spectacle that is really being pushed onto us that the show really didn't need. The show was interesting for other reasons, and now it's taking it to a level that it really doesn't need. And there's a lot of things that I still really don't fucking care about when it comes to the show. I really don't care about this beef with Lori and Alamo. And we'll talk about these things a little bit more in depth as we go through this episode. But that spectacle that Sam Levinson is trying to create is at odds and creating a lot of tension with substance. The substance of the show, the heart of the show, the things about the show that people really enjoyed. And I think sometimes we are skipping over really deep character development, really deep character relationships, intriguing motivations in order to have this spectacle. And we'll talk about the sort of spectacle moments as we go through, but that's what it feels like to me. This world that was so immersive visually and sonically is still also immersive, I guess, visually, just in a very different way. And yet it feels performative. And yet it feels like fan fiction to me. It does not feel like a season of Euphoria. It feels like somebody saw Euphoria and thought, but daddy, I could fix him. And wrote an entire fan fiction about Jacob Elordi or Nate's character just being this misunderstood, sort of pathetic character that we get. Like really mild, really tame this season. I'm wondering if this episode will be the thing that pushes him over the edge. And again, we will talk about all of this, but this is sort of just like my overview of what's happening here. Yada yada, derogatory language, just an unnecessary and abundant amount of slurs that do not push the story forward in any particular capacity. There is a lot in this episode that really worked for me, and I'm really excited to talk about it. There's a lot of stuff in this episode that I paused and audibly sighed at. One of them being when Alamo is like, lucky I have a new friend, Kitty, and the girl like licks her hands like they're cat paws. I actually had to pause and be like, okay, here we go. But there are a lot of things that I think in this episode worked. I think the episode is at its strongest when it's doing its callbacks or when all of these characters' stories are intersecting. I think it's at its weakest in like the flow or the concept of what the show is trying to say. I think in seasons past, it felt very clear what each character's motivation was, and every character felt like a full-fledged person who wasn't just sort of categorically put into these tiny little compartmentalized boxes. I don't really understand what the show is trying to say some of the time. I think there's a lot of things about it that are very visually cool or that are in other circumstances, in other stories might be interesting to me, but they're not necessarily things that I think add to what the show has previously been about. And going into this season, Sam Levinson said, this season of television is about good and evil and its consequences. He's also said that this season is about faith, and we got a lot of faith things in this episode. There's been a lot of faith stuff throughout the entire season so far, but it really framed this faith journey as Rues, and there was some faith-based stuff in this episode, but I can't see where her arc is going with this faith trajectory. I just can't. I think that there's a lot of allegorical stuff that's happening throughout the show, but I don't necessarily feel that it's, again, adding to this journey of people on their experience of faith, particularly for Rues. All right, so while we're talking about Rue and while we're talking about faith, let's just kind of jump into episode and go into everything that happens. We start with Rue in the interrogation room. I thought this was very funny because I thought we got to see a lot of different shades of Rue in this scene. So you can lie to me, I can't lie to you. Very funny. But I also thought that she did not seem nearly as panic-stricken as she should, considering that we've been with Rue through really specific journeys of mania and OCD over the course of the show. Rue is somebody who has been categorized as bipolar with OCD and a severe anxiety disorder. So she's somebody who sort of oscillates between those manic, anxious tailspins and like this lackadaisical, devil-may-care kind of attitude that she possesses out in the world. But I'm missing the part of her that is that manic OCD piece. The Rue who doesn't get out of bed for 24 hours, and gives herself a bladder infection. The Rue who is holding her breath in specific ways. Like the things that we got about her in season 1 and into season 2 just don't align with what I think Rue would do in a situation where she is literally getting pulled over and detained by the DEA, where she's got drugs in her car. I'm just missing the details where she hyper fixates on like the sound of a clock, and she's in this interrogation room. She's sweating. She's trying to think her way out of it, and all she can do is perseverate on this like external noise that's happening. That feels like something that would happen for Rue instead of this sort of quiet resignation that she goes through. There's a little bit of like an oh fuck kind of situation. There's the tears, but there's not as much anxiety as I thought we would get to see in this first opening scene. She's definitely more anxious when she gets to the club. She's less anxious at the DEA. She's like, I don't know, man, maybe looking at prison isn't so bad compared to like going back and then figuring out that I'm a snitch. I'm going to brush over the Goodfellas comp that we do in the That's How I Became a Snitch. She's definitely more anxious when she gets back to the club. She's sweating. She looks like Rue when Rue is on drugs, which is why I think when it gets to the point where in this poker game, Alamo starts calling her out and he's like, you look like a rat who's trying to figure out where it needs to go next. Mind you, we have had rat metaphor in episode 1. We had the rat running under the table at Laurie's house. We've had snakes in every single episode. Every single episode's 4th episode, there was a snake at the strip club. We have had snakes in every single episode. So I don't know if we're supposed to be associating Rue as the rat, Rue as the snake, or if there is another snake or something that we need to be paying attention to. But the snake has been in every single episode so far. And again, this idea of like the snake in relation to biblical connections, where the snake is what is wrapping around the tree, tempting Eve to eat the apple. We talked about all of this in episode 1, so if you want more on like animal symbolism, because there was a lot of it, you could go listen to episode 1. But if you're here now, just know we already touched on this like in depth in that episode. We had a whole animal metaphor corner. So when Alamo gets to this point where he's like, you look like a rat who's trying to figure out where it's going to go next, he immediately jumps to, you've been using again. It doesn't cross his mind that she might be playing them for the DEA. And Rue is like, yeah, you got me. I don't really like that we're at episode 4 and we don't actually know the extent to which Rue is doing drugs. Because Rue is not clean. She's told us that she's quote unquote California sober. What is considered not clean for Rue at this point? Because the question of her being clean comes up multiple times during this episode. And I'm wondering why Sam Levinson is deciding to be so ambiguous with the extent of her drug use. It's not like we haven't seen terrible, horrible things coming from Rue over the course of this entirety of the show. So I also definitely feel like Bishop is working with the feds. I think the way that he seems to really want to keep the poker game going to like deflect off of this conversation that's happening with Rue and where it seems like it's going, the way that Alamo is getting worked up, you're a rat. And Bishop is in the background like, can we see the river? Can we keep this game going? He's trying to progress things. And I'm wondering if that's because he knows that Rue is now working for the feds and he's trying to divert the attention back to the game to smooth things over so she can get done what she needs to get done. So let's talk about Bishop for a second. If Bishop is somebody who's working with the feds, interesting to think about what comes to mind when you think of Bishop. First thing that comes to mind for me is chess. So if you look at a bishop, the bishop can move diagonally across the board, but it cannot jump over interfering pieces. So if there's a pawn in front of it and it's moving diagonally, it can't go past that pawn. When you think about Bishop as a religious construct, a lot of allegorical stuff happening across the season, but especially in this episode, a bishop is a spiritual leader responsible for supervising local churches and fostering spiritual growth. They symbolize shepherding, authority, and apostolistic succession. Bishops act as guardians of unity and faith, providing wisdom to both clergy and the faithful. So also interesting that there is like this role of intermediary between people who are preaching and people who are worshiping, and that could be Bishop's role as well. Speaking of like religion, Rue, this storyline with Alamo here, we have Kitty showing up. We then have this chilling scene of Alamo and Kitty in the boom boom room. And this is a very Euphoria-esque scene where her legs are just opening and he is sort of framed in the middle. I felt like that was really in alignment with like the visual style of what Euphoria tends to do or what it tends to work with. But we end up having this more revelatory moment with Rue when she goes back into Big Eddie's office later on and she sees all of the things that are happening on the TV. Rue came into the experience of being at a strip club as this like big step up from working for Lori when she was drug muling and now she's just like human trafficking. And she didn't realize that, right? She's thinking like, what we do here is not legit, but I would like to own a legit strip club where like women could come and work and whatever she's thinking that this dream is. But she's realizing in this moment as she's watching Kitty essentially get raped with the champagne bottle is so harrowing. It was so upsetting. And you see this like sort of moment, like Rue is there on her knees watching Kitty on the TV with her face then sort of tilted up and all the light coming down. It's like this very religious praying in church experience. And meanwhile, she has said to Alamo, like, hey, I feel like maybe God brought us together. And maybe he did in a lot of ways. But what I think is interesting is if you go back to season 2, where Rue accepts this $10,000 suitcase from Lori, and Lori's like, Rue, by the way, if you fuck me over on this, I'm gonna sell you to some really sick people. Turns out, I think these are the sick people she would have sold them to. They obviously have had a long-standing working relationship, Lori and Alamo. Do I think it would have been more interesting if it caught up to her and she was sold into this? I don't know if I would say that because I don't want to see Rue as somebody who's getting gangbanged and raped and all of this stuff. But sure, like maybe the story could have played out. But I think it's truly that Lori would have sold Rue to Alamo. And I think we get in this episode Rue scraping Angel's name off of the locker for Kitty as Angel's replacement. And they said Angel ran away. She disappeared. Angel has been human trafficked and Rue is complicit in human trafficking somebody. So we get her sort of in this prayer position on her knees with the light coming down as she's having this revelation about what she's actually been a part of, waking up from the fantasy of it and recognizing the reality of it and what this actually means, and also waking up to the reality of her situation. She said last episode she wants to go legit. This is not the life that Rue wants to be leading. We know that she did not want to be a drug mule either. But there is something about the way that Rue as a character, and therefore us, the audience, keeps checking in with Kitty over the course of this episode that is very eye-opening for her. And I was hoping that this would come with her and Angel and realizing that she had trafficked Angel and that something happened to her. I mean, I think that still is coming. We have 4 episodes left, but this is a big moment for her. This is a part of her spiritual awakening. And I think knowing that she is going to be able, with the DEA at her fingertips, to maybe bring down Alamo as well, is maybe this redemption arc or this spiritual arc that she is going to go on that will feel ultimately satisfying for her internally. So we then have like a little bit of Nate and Cassie. The toe is the metaphor, right? When you break something, you have to pick up the pieces. The scar is the metaphor, right? Like it could be shown as a sign of weakness or a sign of strength. And Cassie is just like not fucking having it. She's not having it. She's just like, this is not the life I wanted to be living. Meanwhile, she's going through this list. She's like, your life is a lie. Our relationship is a lie. Your job is a lie. Like all of this stuff you've been lying about. Now, Nate has always been a liar and he's always been a manipulator, but the way that he says, like, you didn't say our love is so fucking pathetic. This is where I'm like, oh, did we just decide that we have a crush on Jacob Elordi and we're just not gonna honor this character at all? Last year, you could not have convinced me. Not last year. I'm saying last year like Euphoria came out last year. Season 2 Euphoria, many years ago, you could not have convinced me that Nate was a man who was actually in love with Cassie. I think this was some self-destructive behavior, but now the fact that he's like, you didn't say our love, he's so pathetic. He's pathetic across this whole episode. And I wonder if it's taking us to a place where Nate feels like he has nothing left to lose. And so he becomes a loaded gun in that capacity. I'm not really sure. I'm also kind of confused a little bit about the Cassie stuff. She is portrayed as so fucking dumb throughout the entirety of this season. But suddenly, while in the midst of her own dark comedic meltdown last episode, I'm bleeding, she is suddenly somebody who would know to put the toe on ice. This woman is so selfish. She doesn't care about anything other than the objective that is in front of her and the thing that she wants. And I think in this episode, when we see her paired with Maddie, that makes her a little bit more ambitious than when she was comfortable and just with Nate. However, I don't see her as being somebody who drives Nate to the hospital. I don't see her as somebody who would know how to do this. A lot of playing fast and loose with these character explorations. I also just feel like, what is the fucking point of showing us that his toe is getting cut off if it's only going to be back next episode? Just let it be toeless. Let there be a consequence. I don't know. Didn't particularly love that the toe got sewed back on. I think it would have been much, much, much better if they would have just let Nate go through this experience of torture, especially because Nate has been somebody who has inflicted so much harm and has inflicted a lot of physical harm. Think about the way that he beat up Tyler. I don't know why that name just came to me. I always forget this dude's name. But the college kid that Maddie had sex with, he beats that kid to a fucking pulp. Like, the kid was like, I can't see in certain places. Like, I can't hear. Whatever he was going through, he really deeply physically assaulted that man. And there was no consequences for it. So I feel like if the show is trying to get at this season, this theme of good and evil and its consequences, why not let Nate be somebody who has to deal with the consequence of physical torture in the way that he has physically inflicted the same torture on other people? But okay. All right, let's talk about sort of the Lexi and Jules stuff. So Lexi offers Jules an opportunity to paint a piece for her network television show, which is getting 7 million views an episode, which I think is pretty significant. Pretty good views there. She tells her picnic in a park. And then Jules ends up painting a bunch of people with penises. Some trans, some not, according to what it looks like, which obviously cannot go on a TV show that Lexi works on. So let's kind of break this down into a couple of different ways, because this was a really hard plot line for me where I'm like, again, what is the show trying to get at and what is it trying to depict and why is this even in here? In seasons prior, Jules being trans has been a critical part of her character, but not the forefront of it. Jules has had other things going on for her and has had other interests and other plot points and other things that have filtered into her as a comprehensive character, because I'm not sure if anyone knows this who's listening to this podcast, but trans people are fully nuanced people with complex ideas and emotions and feelings. This season of television, because it is so steeped in like humiliation porn for each one of these girls, has had such a hyperfixation on Jules being trans. It's been a huge part of her storyline this season. So if we're just starting there, I want to say that I think that by Jules painting this piece of artwork, it is stripping Jules of all of her nuance and compartmentalizing her into somebody who is trans, and so she can only be trans, right? That's the only thing that she can portray. I also think that both girls are wrong here. We've seen a couple of different art pieces that Jules has made so far, and they have all been salacious and nude. So this is how she paints. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the type of artist that she is. Lexi, as her friend, should know this and know that she's not the right artist for this particular position. However, Jules, who is getting this incredible opportunity for Lexi, who didn't grow up in the fucking boondocks, would have had access to TV, I think should just know that this is not appropriate for a network television show. And I don't know what the show is trying to get at, because Lexi and Jules are talking about artists, and Jules is like, who is that? So is this emphasizing that her dropping out of school as an artist was a mistake? That she needs this educational background? I think I'm being generous by saying that, okay? Because I don't think that Sam Levinson has had a positive thing on his mind creating the show. The way that Jules responds to the criticism of all of the nudity, like, you know, they ask her to get rid of the penises. Jules pushes back and says, well, just the penises, not the breasts. And they're like, just scrap all of the nudity altogether. The fact that she responds so poorly to it, like overly emotional, she's like, I don't really understand. I'm feeling limited creatively. Just feels like, is this moment trying to emphasize the idea that she's like a naive Gen Z entitled kid? What I thought was great about this moment is the fact that the network executives are like, we have to handle this delicately after the Lexi tells this crew that she's trans because of the fear of cancel culture. I think that is very true to the world that we live in, but I also think that Jules is an artist going and creating this big painting with all of these penises, 14 penises, is also just emphasizing a narrative that is out in the world right now, particularly in America, that like trans people are obsessed with genitalia, which is just not fucking true. And so I think to put Jules in this position where her as a trans character is like reinforcing this idea that trans people only care about genitalia. Look, there's this trans girl on Euphoria, and she has created this painting of just penises because that's all that they think about and that's all they're obsessed about, is like so wildly red pilled to me, and I don't understand what we're doing. The fact that this mistake, though, for Lexi costs the network $191,000 is important. A lot of the things that, again, Sam Levinson said, the good, the evil, and its consequences, like what is the price that people are paying for the things that they're doing? And some of these prices that people are paying are emotional or physical, and yet some of them are financial. Or like in Rue's case, this is a matter of time, right? Like they're like, hey, you could get 20 years in federal prison and 20 more for all of this stuff. Like you may never see the light of day again. The fact that there is a cost consequence that we're able to see without having to make too many deductions about like the cost. You have something in this episode like Kitty getting, raped with the champagne bottle. That's a physical cost. That's an emotional cost, right? That is a consequence of something that she has done, but that's like the price that she is paying with her physical body versus like these numeric values where we get Lexi with $191,000 mistake and the executive being like, don't be a net negative. And Lexi being like, I won't. This is probably the first time she's ever made a mistake like this in her career, but it's not even just like a little mistake. It's $191,000 mistake. That's a pretty big deal. I didn't love all of this stuff with Jules and Lexi, though I was glad that we had more Lexi in this episode. We have Maddie giving Cassie her makeover. She's going from suburbs to city girl. Suddenly her personality changes with that. Cassie goes and stays with Maddie. She ends up pawning her ring and quote unquote investing in herself, getting an apartment across the pool from Lexi. The apartment, by the way, equally as tacky and corny as her house. What I thought was really great was you have Lexi in her apartment looking out at Cassie's apartment and seeing the flash and Cassie taking these pictures, which is a callback to season 1 when they are sharing a room together as sisters and she's taking nudes under her blanket. And you just see the camera flashing again, a very Euphoria-esque visual shot that I thought was really good and worked really well for me. But as far as like Cassie pawning her ring and quote unquote investing in herself, what is this show trying to say? Now, before I dive into this, I will just pause and say Sydney Sweeney was fucking great in this episode. I thought this was her best performance of the season so far. Cassie as a character away from Nate and paired with Maddie works a lot fucking better than Cassie and Nate worked. But they made Cassie this right-wing satirical stereotype. We have her last episode saying, "You're not a man, men provide." We have her staying home all day. She's not working. Nate works. She cooks dinner. And so I thought it was interesting to begin with that they had this character in Cassie who is supposed to be this right-wing woman who, unless you're Lauren Boebert, are consistently talking about the values that they have around sex and their sexuality as women. These like hyper-conservative women. And you have a character who is a stand-in for these types of women doing OnlyFans. Those don't feel synonymous to me, but okay, fine, whatever. I kind of let that go. Now you have this stand-in for the right-wing woman pawning her wedding ring and leaving her husband, something that doesn't seem like the stand-in for the right-wing woman. And I don't know if that's just because she doesn't have any values herself, Cassie, so she is a dandelion in the wind. She is willing to be whatever the person in front of her is demanding of her. And we know that Maddie is not somebody who is a stand-in for this right-wing woman, right? So I don't know if it's because she's now paired with Maddie, and so like whatever fruit that Maddie is, that's the juice that Cassie will be. Like, is that all that Cassie can be? Is somebody else's juice? I don't know. Maddie then tells her to put on her best outfit. Cassie comes out looking like Maddie. She's got the hair, she's got the front pieces, right? Very old school Maddie. She's in leopard. And I was thinking about this like when she came out, because it's all leopard. I was like, oh, here she is, like a leopard earning its spots. She's about to go earn her spots in this regard. So then we finally have a scene between Lexi, Maddie, Cassie, and Rue. This is very in the bathroom, bitch, you better be joking-esque vibes. This is finally when it starts to feel like Euphoria. These characters playing off of each other is where we get this sort of character comedic gold. You have Rue looking for drugs. She's trying to find a dealer to replace Lori so that she can help the DEA so that she doesn't go to fucking prison. You've got Maddie, who is like, baby, I don't feel comfortable helping you get drugs. You have Lexi being the observer, being the judger, right? This judgmental force where she's like, you relapsed. Rue is like, I'm clean, everybody. I'm clean, I'm clean, I'm clean. She keeps trying to emphasize that she's clean, but Maddie's like, well, I'm not going to help you get drugs. Lexi's freaking out over it. Lexi calls out everybody in the situation. She's like, Maddie is an internet pimp, which, by the way, I called Maddie a digital pimp either one episode or 2 episodes ago, because that is what it is. It was 2 episodes ago because it was during America My Dream, where I was talking about how they're all in sex work and Maddie was acting as this placeholder for like a digital pimp. I felt very vindicated when Lexi said that. She calls Rue out, she calls Cassie out, and then she kind of like goes back into her apartment and shuts the door. She's like, what is fucking wrong with all of you? And she's not wrong. Like, us as the audience keeps asking the same question, right? And yet she's so judgmental about it. That's like who Lexi is. And while all this is happening, you have the leaf blower going on and off. Everyone's yelling over the leaf blower. And particularly you have Cassie trying to talk over the leaf blower, which is so funny. The zoning boarding commission, we've been working up to this case for a while now. He's in court talking about faith and signs, putting us into this religious mindset as we go through this scene with Nate. He then says, you want me on my hands and knees? You want me on my hands and knees begging for my life. He's then going on and on about how he's going to be helping old people. This is a good thing. It's a good thing. I can't be bad. I don't know what kind of mental collapse he's in, but I am wondering what that line, I can't be bad, actually means. What does bad mean for Nate? How did we get to somebody who put a gun to his head to threaten his ex-girlfriend, who broke into people's houses, who had their father arrested, who was breaking into his father's office and his stuff long before anything else? Somebody who, when his father and him actually kind of got into a fight, instead of punching him, he starts self-harming in hopes to freak his dad out, which it does, and continues to rage out this way. Like, Nate has been somebody who is never good. Nobody has ever looked at Nate's character in season 1 or 2 and said good. We've looked at Nate's character and said interesting, fascinating, psychologically thrilling, but nobody's been like, this is somebody who can go on like this amazing redemption arc. So the bridge between where we left Nate and where we picked up this season, and just the docile nature in which that he has been engaging with the people around him in his life, just doesn't feel authentic to me. So when he's on his knees, literally praying with his hands in a prayer position, like praying and begging these people on the board to let him go forward with this because he owes all this money. And then he says, I can't be bad. Well, what does bad mean? Because he's already been bad. He's done so many bad things. Does he feel like doing this one good thing, which I don't even think that he really thinks is a good thing? He's manipulating the system to get what he wants, right? Is it that he thinks that by doing this good thing and by caring for the elderly and giving them a place to die with dignity, that he's doing something good and that is going to eradicate all of the bad things that he's done up until this point? If so, they are doing a horrible fucking job putting those pieces together on the corkboard. If it's an FBI corkboard, we're doing a lot of fucking work to get to that conclusion because they're not doing that for us. And I would say, like, it's fine when you make your audience think about things. I don't think that everything needs to be spoon-fed to us. And I think that when you trust your audience to understand, the show is more interesting. But it's not even that they're just trusting us to understand. It's that it's not clear what they're trying to trust us to understand. So that's that on Nate, okay? They're in the strip club. We're going back to the Silver Slipper. We're in the strip club. We have this line, Angel ran away from rehab, disappeared. Rue then says in her voiceover, it's almost like Magic knew Angel wasn't coming back. Then we've got this scene where Angel then lifts her feet up as Rue is asking Kitty, like, are you okay? Did somebody force you into this? And then immediately went and ratted her out to Big Eddie and said, like, that girl's a snitch. I genuinely think that Magic is in on it. I think that she's in on it. I don't know if she is helping to feed which girl to take next based off of how they're acting in the back rooms to Alamo. I'm not really sure how she's involved. It is clear to me, though, that Magic is involved as one of the people who is a part of this scheme, right? We then have Maddie and Cassie at the club with Ave Maria playing. Not gonna lie, really fucking took me out of the show. This is where some Labyrinth would have been really, really nice. Also, when you think about what Ave Maria is, it's a song that is praying to Mother Mary, Virgin Mary. And then you have this song being intercut with like the most explicit sexual stuff. You know, you have it with Kitty in the Boom Boom Room, and you have it with this humiliation porn once again of Cassie making out with Caitlyn purely for attention, you know, dancing, throwing her hands up in the air, all of this stuff. So very, again, prayer-like, etc. I thought the stuff with Cassie thereafter was very funny, but this is like what she's doing to just have like a little viral hit. And I think that there is something so telling about how Sam wants to explore the way that women in particular will reach for virality when, like, meanwhile this show is playing off of its online presence with like strictly fodder for viral hits online, like its memeability. Sam's exploration of Cassie is like the pot calling the kettle fucking black. So she goes upstairs, she's like, I love coke. It's obvious she's never done coke a day in her life. I thought it was really great. Maddie comes into the room, Cassie going, it's just me, Cassie, and that's my handle. That was really, really funny. I thought that was really great. Maddie then saying to her, you've got their attention now. You have to keep it. This is thrilling to Cassie, who loves to seek attention and validation. I also then love, you know, Rue having this moment where she is watching the cameras and immediately wants to go and check on Kitty and accidentally leaves her phone in Big Eddie's office. So he's holding it when Magic goes in there to snitch on her. And so the DEA hears this conversation, calls Rue once they know that she's in the room, and they're like, you need to immediately discredit her, which she figures out a way to do. Rue, as a former drug addict and therefore a professional liar, is so good in this moment trying to discredit Magic. The psychological manipulation that goes into either convincing other people that you're clean or convincing other people that they're the reason why you're not clean or whatever may be. Like, we've seen a lot of psychological manipulation that Rue has incited over the past couple of years. Rue going into this mode where she immediately goes to discredit her was so good to me. This is Rue at her prime. I love when Rue does this. And then we have Lori's crew, right? In the midst of all of this, Lori's crew pulls up to the scene, holds them all at gunpoint, shoots Big Eddie. They're wearing Obama masks because they're fucking racist and disgusting. They don't shoot Rue. So Rue must know immediately that this is Lori's people because for whatever reason they tend to be tender. about Rue. Oh, I miss Rue, is what Lori said last episode. So he doesn't shoot Rue, but he does shoot Big Eddie. Again, with the Tarantino shot of the blood all over Rue's face. And then we have like Faye as the driver and them being able to discern who it is based off of her lips, this like distinct characteristic that she has. And I don't want to see Faye and Rue at odds. I just don't. All right, let's crack open the burn book where we will look at the superlatives for this episode. The Bold and Bothered Award, strictly for the Femme and the Furious. It is Jules and her art meltdown. I thought that her defacing her art instead of just fixing it like they asked is to make a point. The Shiro Award. The award goes to the baddie who is the most inspiring, or the moment that is the most empowering. And I think it is Maddie, for saying that she is uncomfortable with getting Rue drugs. The Femme Fatale Award for the most smash the patriarchy moment of the episode is Cassie selling her ring. That shit actually had me gagged. I was like, she sold her ring? That big hunk of a rock? Damn, Daniel. And then Speak Your Truth trophy. Best quote or line. It's just me, Cassie. And that's my handle. The best. Love it. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Femme and Furious. If you like this episode, share it out with your friends, comment or leave a review wherever you get your podcast. I will be back on Friday. We are finishing The Deal, the book. We are going chapters 31 through the end to the epilogue. I will then be back on Sunday with a fully loaded bonus episode. We are covering Margot's Got Money Troubles. And until then, don't get disappeared from a rehab.